Now, there's a lot going on, as you know, in the last week and a half in relation to travel. The latest news tonight, of course, is that Aer Lingus pilots have voted to strike. Don't know how it's going to pan out, don't know what sort of shape the strike will take, but they have voted overwhelmingly in favour of industrial action and a dispute over pay. And then, on top of that, we've been listening to stories in relation to the insolvency of the FTI Group. This is it's one of Europe's biggest tour companies. They filed for insolvency this week, caught everybody by surprise. And one of its subsidiaries is U-Travel, which supplies accommodation to multiple travel agents in Ireland, as well as online travel agents. It's kind of very complicated, but holidaymakers are being urged to book with an Irish-based travel agent to avoid disruption caused by this insolvency. And I'm joined on the line by Eoghan Corry from Travel Extra. He's a leading travel commentator in Ireland. It's always a joy to talk to him. And I think the last time we spoke, Eoghan, it was 10 o'clock in the morning, but it's 10 o'clock at night now, so good evening to you.
Good evening. It's actually, it's 4:15 where I am. It's a few minutes past 4 o'clock where I am in Memphis in Tennessee, following the trail of Elvis. So, but very much in tune with the very dramatic developments of the last few days back in Ireland.
Tell me, you're in Tennessee, and I didn't know you were an Elvis fan. That's fascinating.
Well, neither did I, but I'm intrigued by the impact he had on popular culture, and I'm sort of I've just immersed myself very heavily in the Memphis blues and country tradition and the way that all of this came together. There's sort of little bits of the Elvis story that I picked up down the years. I always felt there was an element that he was usurping music that was created by the black community, that as a white person, because it was still in the 50s unacceptable for black people. But it's a lot more complicated than that. And the fusion in Memphis of people flooding into from the countryside in the late 40s and early 50s brought this amazing music. I had a trip down Beale Street last night from club to club. A huge generation of young people that have grown up in this tradition, and what a city, what a buzzing, vibrant, bouncing musical city. So exciting.
Yeah, of course, he hung out a couple of times with Sam Cooke, but no one could know that because it was in one of the black music clubs, and obviously he would have been ostracised and ended up in all sorts of trouble with, the segregation that was going on at that stage in the Deep South.
And Tupelo, where he grew up, was even more segregation. I was there earlier in the week for an Elvis festival. Sadly, they wouldn't take my late entry for the Elvis impersonator. I'm only joking. But I did go to the competition, the final of the competition, the All-America competition. One guy from Norway, all dressed in their white jumpsuits on the stage, lined up, all looking like Elvis. It was surreal. But even growing up, he had very, very close black friends, and he went to play with them. And in the segregated community at the time, he was he wasn't going to be a sort of I have a dream Martin Luther King, but he was doing a little bit chipping away at it, and really interesting that there was the first, by coincidence, the first black radio station evolved in Memphis, a station that wasn't doing very well decided to play black music. And Elvis was one of the people who went in to play on the black station and did gigs went to gigs with his friends, where his friends would have to take the side entrance because they were black, and he'd go in the main entrance because he was white, and then reunite inside. Marvellous stories here. And met Elvis's cousin came out to meet me because I was brought here as a journalist, and we had most amazing afternoon together. And the nurse who looked after Elvis in his later life I met her yesterday. I cannot think of, first of all, the Elvis impersonator competition, but then also Elvis in later life, without thinking of that episode of Father Ted, where they got Father Jack to do the third phase of Elvis's life. And sadly enough, I'm trying to laugh in the corner because it takes too much explaining to my hosts here why that keeps coming back into my head.
I was going to ask, would you recommend the trip? But I can hear it in your voice. It sounds like something that I'd love to do. But yeah, you would. You'd recommend it
without any hesitation. And there's so many. There's sort of the coincidences that change people's lives, quite extraordinary. the author of Blue Suede Shoes, the guy who actually wrote the song, was supposed to go on television to sing it, and he had a car crash the week before, and Elvis, who was a great mate of his, was recruited to do the job, and Elvis's career just took off. You often wonder those little turns of fate on the road that change people's lives. There's no doubt there was no stopping him anyway, because when you look at the very early photographs of him, the high school photographs in the first studio, they played in the Sun Studios where I just visited. They played the ballad, which was never released, that he recorded, which he recorded for his mum about a year before he got to go back in and sing "That's All Right, Mama," which became his first hit. Yeah. And it was, it wasn't going to go anywhere, but you could see the passion for the music, and the nervousness in his voice was even detectable. Mm-hmm. But also the stunning good looks. There was going to be no stopping this guy when he got near a microphone.
Yeah, it must be extraordinarily hot there today, is it?
It's a bit hot. I mean, it's 31, 32. It was a little bit humid. It was very heavy humidity earlier in the week down in Tupelo. Not weather you'd want to be out picking cotton in.
That's very true, yeah, very true. Now, I tell you one thing. I was going to say, would you like to give us a bar of an Elvis song, but maybe another night.
I did it for my I sang my daughters to sleep, but wise men say only fools rush in, and I can't help falling in love with you. And I don't ever gave them nightmares, but they have forgiven me for it, because they've all grown up now.
Well, at least you didn't end up in the ghetto afterwards anyway, so.
We're going to start a battle of Elvis puns coming for the next few. If we're not careful, don't step in my shoes. Okay.
Yep. Let's talk about some serious business evolving here this evening. Pilots in Aer Lingus have voted overwhelmingly in favour of industrial action in a dispute over pay. Am I right in thinking that this was coming? It was coming down the line, wasn't it?
They couldn't be stopped, Gareth. It was December. The pilot pay. This has gone through three safety nets. It's crashed through three safety nets. The first was the Pilot Pay Tribunal. That was set up after a series of disputes in the early noughties. It's supposed to solve these matters. December. Then it goes to the WRC. Listeners will be familiar with trade union legislation. It goes to the WRC. They couldn't get out of the WRC quickly enough. They then go to the Labour Court. The Labour Court, most trade unions and management like to keep things in the negotiations, because you lose control once it goes to the independent three-person tribunal, and very often they come back with a proposal that makes both sides equally grumpy. So what was interesting here was how quickly it went through the first two phases. The Labour Court came back. They rejected. They're quite disciplined as a union. They rejected it by over 90%, the Labour Court recommendation. They're looking for 23%. Aer Lingus weren't going to propose that. I can't remember the initial proposal, but the Labour Court went between the two, said 9%. They rejected it immediately, balloted for the strike. Why are they in such a hurry? Summer.
Yeah.
Once it comes into the autumn, the strike doesn't have the same resonance. What do I expect now? I don't know the future. I don't know what's going to happen. But I do think that we'll see a lot of sabre rattling and no strike. And this is why. The aviation business is a peculiar business. If you call a strike for, let's say, the last weekend in July, traditionally the busiest weekend for Aer Lingus of the year, the bookings, the forward bookings don't come in for that. They'll book the week after, the week before. You can actually cause €6 or €7 million worth of a hit to an airline without going on strike at all. So that's the tactic that IALPA would have used under the previous president, who, famously came up against Willie Walsh, who'd been a trade union official in his own time. And that was a different time, because Aer Lingus are no longer standalone. Are part owned by the state. They are part of a foreign airline group, IAG, and the group had, when Aer Lingus aircraft that were in order, and people in aviation are really excited about Aer Lingus being picked as the launch customer of the Airbus A321XLR. Big deal. It's the longest range for any narrow body aircraft. Aer Lingus was going to be the first airline in the world to get it. IAG decided, because the pilots are fighting with them, that the first two are going to Iberia instead. Aer Lingus have lost that status. It was the first time since 1958 they were going to be the launch customer of a new aircraft. I'm going to be very careful how I pronounce the last time for anyone who wants to know. The last aircraft they were launch customer of, I have to be very careful to how I pronounce it, because I can hear the boys sniggering at the back of the class.
Was
it the Fokker friendship?
It was the Fokker 50.
The Fokker friendship.
The Fokker
yeah, the Fokker friendship. But anyway, they launched. So what we're seeing is the growth plans for Aer Lingus, which are essential for the airline, being postponed. The new pilots that were to be hired as part of that growth plan are not. It's not clear they're now going to be hired. So while IALPA is saber rattling and running to the wire on this, and I do expect negotiations on the day before the strike, everything's clear and the flights aren't affected, but the bookings have been. But I do think that the people are going to be the damage to the airline could be a little bit more than anyone intended. In the aftermath of pandemic and in the sort of the very shaky world where the aviation is at the moment, it could do a fair amount of damage.
I was trying to rack my brains this afternoon to recall when the last time Aer Lingus went on strike. Am I right to think it was 2003?
Yeah, it was. We went to the wire, we didn't actually have a strike, and the last. There was one in the 80s, but the last major strike, which is really important in Irish history, was 1977, because the analysis people made of economies in those days were a little bit different. There was a huge pilot strike which really set back the Irish economy. It's quite clear in retrospect. It wasn't clear at the time. It affected our GDP. It completely derailed any government plans to restart the economy after the oil crisis, and contributed, it wouldn't be the only factor, but contributed to the recession of the 1980s. A pilot strike, it's very different now. There is a major airline, Irish airline, which has a bigger market share than Aer Lingus, but a pilot strike can do huge damage. The latest example, Gareth, would have been Scandinavian SAS. They had a series of summer strikes 2 years ago now, 2 summers ago, and it weakened the airline so much that they are now in the throes of being taken over by Air France. We also had pilot strikes right across Europe post-pandemic. The pilots, they're the most powerful unions. Planes can't fly without them. They behave like all the other Aer Lingus unions have signed up to the deal that was on offer. But pilots tend to see themselves in a different stratosphere, which they are 6 miles up in the sky from other people, and they tend to push a bit harder. And I think Aer Lingus are following a European lead on that. Which it has been effective in the past.
And do you remember Ronald Reagan had just become president, and the pilots?
They were
the
air traffic controllers.
That's right. The air traffic controllers. They all went on strike. About 6,000 of them. And he decided he'd sack them all. He sacked every one of them.
And, Ireland is different. Our air traffic controllers went on strike, and it went back into negotiation. And the salary is very high for air traffic controllers. So the IA published the salaries, and it sort of weakened their hand. I see Aer Lingus did that a little bit at the weekend. The pay increase they're looking for is 49,000, which is as much as a lot of people would earn in a year.
Yeah.
So the rhetoric, and my experience of Aer Lingus is that they tend to factor in the cost of what it costs rather than what ends up in a pilot's salary. Pilots are well paid, and rightly so. They have the safety of all these things.
Yes.
It's such a high pressure job and a very difficult job, because so much of it is automated that you actually have these peak periods of decision making and stress, which are more concentrated, which it probably adds to the pressures of the job. So nobody's debating whether they should be well paid. The real issue is here what the contagion effect would be through Aer Lingus, and whether it's the sort of economic kick that an airline doesn't need, especially when you're part of a 4-part group, where the other three, you're up against the other 3 airlines for the new aircraft that are being delivered, and also you're supposed to be recruiting pilots. It's quite clear from what Aer Lingus have said They will not be recruiting new pilots under these conditions until this mess is sorted out.
So do you think a strike will go ahead, or as you
No.
mentioned there earlier on, that it will come, literally you'll get right to the gates and it will be resolved? Is that what they think that will
and there'll
happen?
be this talk, and it'll go on all day Friday, and it'll go on all Saturday. And I've been around, and I'm a proud trade union member myself, and I've been at people who've been in talks. What tends to happen is nothing gets said for 48 hours, and then with an hour and a half to go at 4 o'clock in the morning, everything gets agreed. And everybody would be a lot happier if they did it in the first hour and a half rather than the last hour and a half. Because I also there tends to be, it's like having the penalty shootout, before the match. You should do it first. An awful lot of what goes on is withdrawing to another room. That's another interesting one. And then leaving everybody waiting. And the Aer Lingus team are in one room and the IALPA are in the other room. And the IALPA won't actually tell you when they've stopped discussing. So you're waiting and waiting and waiting. So it's real, it's sort of Clint Eastwood stuff. People would say it's more childish than that, but it's elaborate, evolved trade union negotiation tactics. And we have a very good process in Ireland to avoid what happens in France. And the England solution was Margaret Thatcher just took a sledgehammer to the trade unions. We did something very different. We set up an elaborate series of checks and balances, which included what we've just been through, the WRC and the Labour Court, and we had the National Implementation Board in the past. Look at reading in the years and you see the havoc, the strikes, refuse strikes, bus strikes, oil tanker strikes, which caused massive damage. That was the norm in the Ireland of my childhood, or a little bit ahead of it. And that was solved by all the checks and balances. What we're seeing in Aer Lingus at the moment is a reminder of what happens when somebody wants to bulldoze their way through the checks and balances, or if the checks and balances weren't there in the first place, we'd be seeing this sort of thing more often.
Right, okay, so watch this space. Now, let's talk about the FTI group. This has kind of confused quite a lot of people over the last week. The disruption that's been caused by the insolvency of the FTI group. Can you tell us what's the FTI group and what do they do?
They're a tour operator. They'd be like what happened when budget travel failed in Ireland. They would be up against Dare and TUI and people like that in transporting German holidaymakers all over Europe. They've been around for a long time. They have a lot of customers who are going to be affected. The airlines that they chartered, that doesn't affect Irish customers at all, Irish holidaymakers. But they have their fingerprints in a lot of the bed and accommodation sector. These are people who buy beds off airlines and sell them on to tour operators. And one operator that has been dealing heavily with the two components of FTI that have a presence or that would be affecting Irish holidaymakers. One of our Love Holidays. They're a peculiar organisation in that they're not Irish-based. They're not a travel agent in the traditional sense. They are a travel agent, though, and they just buy... They don't own their own buses or planes or anything. They just buy off other people, sell them on to the customer. They pay concentrate an awful lot of their marketing on Google. And that has an interesting effect that if you Google almost any destination in Europe, Love Holidays is the first one that lands in the box. Now, sometimes they're cheaper, sometimes they're not, but they pay Google to come top of the search. And that puts... even people would, they dial in, they type in a travel agent's name, their local travel agent. It's not the local travel agent comes top, it's whoever pays Google a couple of euro to come top. Right. And it tends to be Love Holidays, and it works because they're going to sell about 60,000 holidays out of Ireland. And they've been using one of the accommodation suppliers, and here's the rub. When the accommodation supplier comes down, your insurance and your refund status is not the same as if you book with your traditional tour operator and your Irish bonded travel agent.
Am I right in thinking the reason Love Holidays has succeeded so well with Irish holidaymakers is that, first of all, you can put a deposit of €29 down and that guarantees your holiday until the next instalment is required, isn't that it?
Yes, but that's not just Love Holidays. That's Click and Go. That's every single travel agent. Yeah. The difference between going to the airline, paying your full fare, then going to the hotel, paying your full cost, and going to a tour operator is there's a deposit. Some of them are €1 deposits. You see all these offers in January. It's the difference between the formal, traditional travel sector and how it works. And they are part of that. Now, it's quite complicated. They didn't pay refunds during the pandemic, the great meltdown, and they weren't established in Ireland at that stage. Since then, they have been, and they have an Irish presence with an Irish management. And that is sort of regularised in America. They're being regarded as a disruptor. Some people would have more titles for them, but that's what they were doing at the beginning. And this is a real test of how they're going to respond to a situation where a lot of the people who booked with Love Holidays are now finding when they turn up at the accommodation, they are being told by the hotelier who hasn't received his money, you don't have a room unless you pay again. Yeah. And it's not clear if the first fee that they paid is going to be refunded to them.
So I heard today, just literally from someone who has booked through Love Holidays, he said to me, oh, no, everything's fine again. Things have chilled out and cooled down and everything is safe. But I'm also hearing from another reputable travel spokesperson that that's not the case. They're still waiting to find out what the greater fallout from the FTI insolvency situation will be. Am I right in thinking that?
There has been reassurance. There's been a little bit more reassurance in the last few days than we've seen in the past, and that has helped a good deal. But I also am not sure, if the number of people in Ireland that's been affected is as great as in other countries. We do know that English, it was all over social media, the number of English holidaymakers who were impacted, particularly by U-Travel. Right. The figure of U-Travel. There are two components of the empire, the FTI empire that have gone down. For German holidaymakers, it's a lot worse. There are about 60,000 of them are stranded. Mm-hmm.
Just, I know I don't want to hold up your break there any longer because you're probably going for just to let everybody know. Anyone who's just come into the conversation, Eoghan Corry's on with me from Travel Extra, leading travel commentator in Ireland, and he's in Tennessee at the moment. So apologies first of all for interrupting such a lovely break.
Not at all. I was on the Tonight Show just immediately before you, so you're not the only interrupter of the night.
Okay. Is that with Stephen Colbert, or is that the?
It's back in Dublin.
Oh God!
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I'm awaiting the calls from Fox News and CNN.
Yeah. That Tonight Show.
Don't call us. We'll call you.
Now, just I want to come back before I let you go. The Irish Travel Agents Association saying it recommends holidaymakers, as they always do, wisely so, to book with an Irish travel agent.
The problem is people assume that if you go on the internet, because you book directly with Ryanair, and this Ryanair narrative is very successful, saying don't cut out the middleman. All of these guys are middlemen. Love Holidays, all of these guys are middlemen. In some cases, they're taking more than your travel agent that is on the street in Dublin, in the street of your provincial town. They're taking 25, 30, 40% in some cases. The difference is that the 40% that a commission that you're paying to book with an online guy, and it's generally less than I better not generalise it. 40% is generally between 15 and 20. It ends up in Connecticut or Spain, not in Mullingar or Portage or wherever your travel agent is.
Right. Okay. But one of its subsidiaries is the FTI subsidiary U-Travel. They supply accommodation to a lot of travel agents in Ireland. So are our travel agents here, as in step off the street and enter the shop and say hello to Jane in Shandon Travel? Would Shandon Travel be, say, for example, and I'm only using that name because we would tend to book holidays and that through Shandon Travel in Cork, great travel agency. Would they be affected in the same way, say, for example, as Love Holidays would be?
Not to my knowledge.
Right.
We've had accommodation failures. The last one was 2016. With No Cost, I think was the name of the company, and we've had Irish travel agents being caught. But what tends to happen is the Irish travel agent will work to rebook the accommodation at no cost to the client, and if there's a failure in the system, for a major failure, you have a bond. You place it. You're bonded, and with a licensed travel agent, there's a bond in place to keep people from going out of pocket. There are problems with the fact that the bonding system was brought in before credit cards. It was to stop people being stranded abroad. Hasn't evolved with the times, so that one component failing, as happened in 2016, doesn't give you the same protection. But to my knowledge, the only travel agent which has been impacted is Love Holidays, and also that the Package Holiday Directive protections which are in there will protect the Irish consumer with an ordinary travel agent, a walk-in-the-street travel agent, be they Discover Travel or Shandon Travel or Lead Travel or all those wonderful travel agencies in Cork.
Okay, great. Eoghan, great to chat to you. And
always a huge pleasure.
Yeah, likewise.